Welcome to a very exciting episode of She Said, She Said, as we chat with our all-time favorite person in the Beatles world and celebrate the release of his expanded and enhanced new book. But for a moment, we'll leave you on needles and pins, wondering who that might be as we introduce ourselves. I am Lena Stagg, the author of the Recipe Records cookbook series of rock and roll cookbooks, hailing from Evansville, Indiana, where I also run and own a historic pit barbell club gym, the home of the famous and effective super slow workout. My cookbooks are an amalgam of delicious and easy to prepare recipes set to the rhythm of rock and pop songs from the 1950s through today. We have Recipe Records, a tribute to the Beatles, Recipe Records, the 60s edition, as well as the original Recipe Records. We also have a tribute to the Rolling Scones. Let's spend the bite together. Each recipe has its own unique music playlist to accompany your delicious meals. It's really a party in a book for you to enjoy. Check all of them out at lenastagg.com.
And hey guys, how are you? I am Jude Southerland Kessler, Lena's sidekick and the author of the John Lennon series. And I want to show you Lena's cookbooks. This is her original Recipe Records, and this one covers music from the 50s all the way to the 90s. And I mean, they are so clever because they've got great titles that go with each one. Radar Love Muffins, and Mix a Lot of Buttermilk Biscuits, and Take a Little Pizza, My Heart. Got it. A Little Pizza, My Heart. This one is for 60s one. These are all the recipes that you grew up with, your mama making, all the familiar recipes. Here's the Beatles. Look how clever this thing is, the Beatles book with stuffed Sergeant Peppers. Great recipes, including my mother's strawberry pie forever recipe. And here are those bad boys of rock and roll, the Rolling Scones. This one has a lot of great recipes like Under My Rum. Yep, you're going to love them all. In fact, I have to be honest and say that during the shutdown, the COVID shutdown, and the whole year that I was stuck in the house for a year and a half without leaving. This is what I miss most, was being able to go to the grocery store and get the ingredients to make the Recipe Records recipes. They are great. But what did I do? I did what I do, and that is work on the John Lennon series. It's a series. It's going to be 9 books. We're up to book 5.5. Book 5 was so fat, we had to divide it into 2 parts. But 4 more to go after this next one comes out in the year. And they tell the story of John and his mate, the Beatles, as if you're there almost day by day. In fact, right now it is day by day. I'm writing the making of Rubber Soul, and they're in the studio every day. And I am not a music expert, and it is killing me.
Oh.
But they're getting there. They're getting through those studio days, day by day by day by day. It's written like a story, but everything is documented, footnoted, so you're getting what they ate, what they wore. Sometimes John wears the same outfit 5 days in a row. I don't know why, but he does. And what they said, what they did, it's all the truth. It just reads like a story. But that is that. I want to say that we have someone on today who lived day by day with the Beatles, and we are so excited. Lena, tell us a little bit about him.
Well, I also want everyone to know that you can get Jude's first book on audiobook. And if you like to read, that's super great. But listening to her book on an audiobook is absolutely brilliant. Scott McKinley was the narrator, and he does a fantastic job of the speaking in all of the Beatles voices, as well as many, many other characters in the Beatles stories. So if you're afraid, if you've never done an audiobook like me, I went to Chirp, and it was very easy to just download it on my phone. and I bought the audio book, and I can listen to it on my phone. I can listen to it in the car, at home, anywhere. And you can pick it up anywhere in the book and be completely absorbed in the story that Jude has written. And the hearing it from Scott McKinley's exquisite.
That guy is good. He's so good. I auditioned him of all the Beatles voices, and he was spot on. Brian, spot on. And I was scared to death because I thought anyone that can do John Lennon's deep voice isn't going to be able to do Cynthia. Huh. He studied Cynthia. He is spot on Cynthia. So he's really, really great. And you get volumes 1, 2, and 3, all 3 in the audiobook. So don't be afraid to, I don't want to jump in with volume 3. It's all of them. Like Lena said, it's volume 1, 2, and 3. Thank you, Lena. So sweet.
It's fantastic. It's so fantastic. But tonight we have a very exciting guest with us. This is his 5th appearance on She Said, She Said, probably the most appearances of any show that he's ever been on, barring Netflix, maybe. But he continues to release historically important and beautifully written books about the most outstanding figures of the last 50 years. The last time he was with us, he talked about his book, Manson Exposed, the complete story of the Charles Manson cult murders trial and what is happening today with the various cult members. Since then, he's been working, writing a new book that we're going to discuss, and also has been very busy reworking and enhancing a book that we love and adore called The Beatles and Me on Tour. It has just been re-released with new stories, new photos, and new information.
And it arrived on my doorstep about 20 minutes ago. So I kept going out, looking out the door. I finally said to my husband, I hate to tell you, but you're going to have to take an umbrella and go down to the mailbox, which is quite a hike. And we opened the door, and there it was.
Wow.
Beautiful, gorgeous book. So excited to see it. I have to tell you that, yes, he was, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, the only journalist to tour with the Beatles on the 1964 tour from day one to day end. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But he also had the distinction in 1965 when the Beatles were invited finally to go meet Elvis Presley, because there had been haggling for a year about how this summit was going to happen. The stipulation that both the Beatles and Elvis made was no journalist. They allowed Chris Hutchins of New Musical Express to go because he had been instrumental in putting the meeting together. But the Beatles chose one person that they wanted to accompany them. And that one person was the author of this book and our special guest tonight. You don't get chosen by the Beatles to go with you somewhere. They're very picky. They don't trust people. They don't like a lot of people. They don't think that people are going to be fair to them. If you're selected to go with them on that historic night, you have earned, that is a badge of honor that you have earned. And that story is discussed in this book. He is also, in so many other ways, one of the most respected journalists of the whole century, because he has interviewed Ali McGraw, Steve McQueen, Elizabeth Taylor, good friends with Muhammad Ali. I could go on and on. Lena talked about the fact that his first book, Five to Die, which became Manson Exposed, was chosen as court record because it was so authentic and so right. He had done all of the research about the Mansons and why this murder happened. And really, well, he'll tell you that whole story because he was even threatened by a Manson cult member. But he also was with Bobby Kennedy and was with him on his campaign, and in fact was just feet from him when he was killed. And he was also with Ronald Reagan as one of the boys on the bus when Reagan was campaigning. One night he and I were sitting and having pizza in Chicago, which I hope we're going to do again this coming year. And I said to him, Ivor, other than touring with the Beatles, what else have you ever done? And when he told me all the things that I'm telling you, I was blown away. One of the things that he does is he's undercover. He is very much undercover because when James Meredith entered Ole Miss, no reporters were allowed for this historic moment. And so he posed as a student, even slept on the floor of the dorm the night before to go in and cover this historic story. So Lena and I are excited beyond belief to welcome to the show. I say it unabashedly. We've had great people on the show. Our favorite number one favorite person to ever be on She Said, and number one favorite person in Beatles world, Mr. Ivor Davis. Woo!
Well, thank you for that stunning introduction. Before we talk, I've got to say a couple of things. Number one, once a lady talked about her food, I got very hungry and was going to leave. Number one. Number two was, I want to tell you, it is remarkable. Jude's book, the audio book with Scott McKinley doing it. I can't tell you how difficult it is to recreate the voices of 4 different Beatles. They had Liverpool accents. Believe me, they were distinctly different. And that is the tough thing. Paul was a bit more edificated, as we used to say, because I think he grew up with Jane Asher and her family for a couple of years and started meeting the hoi polloi of London. Sorry to go on, but you know me, I go on. And George had a very Scouse accent, and John had his accent, and Ringo was very Liverpudlian. So to recreate each of their voices so distinctly different is a huge achievement. And having listened to your book, well done, well done. Now, one other question. I'm sorry, I know it's your program, but you know me.
It's your program.
So I just read Barbra Streisand's autobiography. Now, it is 900 pages long, and guess who read her autobiography? Barbra Streisand, of course. She's a modest lady. How long do you think, I don't think I'm going to listen. How long do you think Barbra Streisand's autobiography, audio book, read by her, lasts? Take a guess.
3 days.
Well, you're close. 48 hours. Yeah. So if you go on the next walk and it's going to last you 48 hours, take that audio book. And Barbara did not pay me to say that.
I cannot say much because ours is 33 hours.
But that's okay. Yeah. But yours is a huge, anyway, but it is interesting. 48, but it's a lot of walks, isn't it, Jude?
It's a lot of walks, a lot even as slow as I am. It's a lot of walks.
Yeah.
I have to say. Hey, Ivor, I've got a telegram for you. Remember when the Beatles went on Ed Sullivan and they got that telegram supposedly from Elvis, which
yes,
we all know was really from the Colonel?
That's right.
Well, I've got one for you. Are you ready? You have to tell me who sent this to you. Ivor was there. Need I say more? The subject of a documentary with more travel miles than the Traveling Wilburys. His first book on his friends, the Beatles, was so good, he released it again rather than do a new one. Not even Shakespeare re-released his books. When I read Ivor, I am never bared. Congrats on the book and for being a beloved soccer hooligan, intellectual author, and a rival to Zelig. You're the tops, you're the upper stratos.
Wow, that's, boy. Zelig, what a character. Remember him? But yeah, what a great movie that was. But thank you. That's,
who do you think sent that to you?
Well, I think probably Jude did.
It's from Bob Wilson.
Bob Wilson. Oh, the other. Oh, gosh, yeah. There you go. Well, thank you, Bob. He does drive me nicely insane at times, but Bob, if you're tuned in, and I'm sure you are, I'm only kidding.
He wanted to make sure that you got your telegram from the Colonel. So there you go.
Yes, that was very clever. Yeah, thank you.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so Ivor, Jude and I have shared some incredible moments with you over the last decade at the Fest for Beatles fans, the Grammy Museum Symposium, where Frida Kelly also served as the special guest. And several times you were kind enough to be our featured author at Beatles at the Ridge in Arkansas. I keep up with you on Facebook and Instagram. Impressive.
Thank you.
And I know you are super busy. So, what sort of events are coming up for you soon?
Well, there's a lot of stuff and it's a real mishmash. But the main thing is my new Beatle book is out now. And I have a book launch at the Museum of Ventura County on Thursday. And you can actually, if you want to hook onto the Museum of Ventura County and you're not fed up with me by the end of today, it should be fun because I've got somebody else to interview me like you interview me. So that takes me off the hot coals and I can have a cup of tea in between and, that sort of stuff. So that's what I'm doing. I'm doing so many other, I'm doing something with the BBC next week. So I've got, the usual stuff. You bang the drum loudly because as you know, Jude knows this, the hard work is writing the book, but the even harder work is getting it out to people, telling them what you've written, because writers are not instinctively, I don't think, unless you can argue the point, writers are not, they're not pitchmen, they're not Colonel Tom Parker, they're not Carnival Barkers. Writers write and they stay home and they're locked up in their room, as you are, Jude, until you finish that bloody book. And so it goes against the grain of many people. And so it's a tough road. And I'm going to say a long and winding road, but that's too corny. So, you have to get out there and sell it. So that's my new Beatle book. And then later on in the year, May, I've got an amazing book. And I say amazing book because it's not about the Beatles. It's about a friend of mine who turned out to be a cold-blooded killer.
Oh, Lord.
And that's again, trying to juggle two books at the same time is always difficult, but I've gone on long enough. Back to you.
That is going to be so interesting. I mean, was this something that you had any idea about when you were,
we always think, Jude, that we know people, but it's amazing that you don't. And my friend in Malibu was a wonderful guy, a cool guy in all the showbiz environment. He was very non-showbizy. And that's what I liked about him. And his wife, who taught my kids, and his kid who went to school with my kids, died in this accident. We were absolutely horrified that this accident took place. Then 3 months later, he was arrested for their murder. I went to the trial. I still believed his innocence, and he was found guilty. And then I set out with my late wife to hopefully find that he was innocent, but then I found he was more guilty than I ever thought. And that was a horrible thing because we think we know people, but we really don't.
That's shocking.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
what's the name of the book?
The book is called The Devil in My Friend, and it will be out in May. And, every writer wants a book turned into a mini-series, so I'm working on it. So there you go. So it's to juggle a Beatle book and a murder book is very difficult. It's tough enough, as Jude and you know, that you have to concentrate on one thing at one time. Anyway, I've rambled on. Back to you.
That's really incredible. Well, you emailed and said that you would be gracious enough to give away a couple of books, of signed books. So you have some trivia questions. Do you want to ask those trivia questions or do you want me to ask them?
Well, if you have the questions at your fingertips, because I might have mentioned it to you. Okay, let me see if I go ahead, Jude.
Okay, here we go. This is from Ivor. So he's going to give, the way we're going to have to work this is, if you're watching this show and you're one of the first people to watch it, you're going to have a leg up. So email me at that's my husband, Rand, J, that's me, Kess, Kess, at Comcast, Comcast.net, RJKess, Kess, at Comcast.net with the answer. The first person with the date and timestamp to answer this question is going to win a signed book of the Beatles and Me on Tour by Ivor Davis. And the question is, what famous pop music star of the 60s and 70s became so enchanted with the Beatles that there's a hint for you, she ended up touring with them for 4 days on the 1964 tour and becoming maybe the most famous groupie in the world? And here's a clue. She was a close friend of Bob Dylan. Now, I have to qualify this question and say, I don't know if it was the Beatles she was enchanted with, or maybe somebody that's really very enchanting. That's all I'm going to say. Lena, do you have any ideas about that?
I may, but I don't want to spoil it.
You don't want to spoil the party?
I don't want to spoil the party.
Well, there's a fun, I must tell you, I mean, when I discovered this, it was great fun. And this person was told to keep her hands off of John Lennon. And before that, the John Lennon and the Beatles were told to keep their hands off of her. But she obviously liked the Beatles to go on the road with them. So that's, I mean, I think everybody knows the answer to this, but I'm not going to say any more.
And the second question, which country, I don't even know the answer to this. I do not know. Which country did John Lennon tell Ivor personally that he would run away to if he was called up to do 2 years of mandatory national service in the British Army? I want to give any kind of clues to that, Ivor?
Well, all I'll say is the word country may confuse people because John had, how shall I say, some hereditary background to this country. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, I may know the answer now.
Now you do, yeah.
I might just know the answer to that. Well, okay. Thank you for giving away those 2 books, Ivor. That's very generous of you. And yeah. I will get the names of the people to you. So don't forget, guys, email me, rjkess@comcast.net, if you know the answers to that. So, Ivor, you are just like Lena and me, NNW, never not working. I know that. But I want people to understand before we get to your book, The Beatles and Me on Tour, that you were the only journalist. I had someone, a very knowledgeable person in the Beatles world, write to me the other day and say, well, I don't understand why you say Ivor was the only journalist to tour with them. Wasn't this person on the tour? Wasn't this person on the tour? Yes, there were a lot of journalists on the tour. But for example, our buddy Art Schreiber was on the 1964 tour. He did not join the tour until Atlantic City because he was covering the Democratic National Convention. And yes, the esteemed dean of Philadelphia journalism, Larry Kane, at that time was working at WFUN Radio in Miami, was also on the tour. But he had to leave for a few days when you guys got to Key West, when you were getting away from Hurricane Dora, I believe it was.
Correct. Yeah.
He had to leave and go back to Miami to work for a few days. So he was gone. You were the only person to be there from the first day straight through all the way to the last day on that tour. And you had a secondary job that you were doing besides touring with the Beatles. So tell us who you were working for, what paper you were representing, and what that other job was that you were doing.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Jude. A lot of particularly DJ music guys got on at Cleveland and got off at New York if they were based in New York. So it was a changing parade of journalists and music people. What I was doing as my extra job on the journey, and probably why I got to go with them from day one, was I was asked to be George Harrison's ghostwriter. My paper, the London Express, used to have a column by George, which was written by me on that tour. The only problem I had with George was he wasn't the most outgoing even then. And I say this with a sense of humor, and he never smiled a lot because I was talking to somebody who knew, and they said, well, the Beatles had not very good teeth. I don't want to get too dental with you, but this is kind of an offbeat. And it's true. Growing up in England, as I did, dental care was non-existent. And any kid who wore braces to hold their pants up, called suspenders. So anyway, moving on from bad teeth. George also, like the rest of the Beatles, went to bed at 2 a.m. in the morning and woke up at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, which was bad for me because I had a deadline. So I had to either wake them up, which I didn't do, or make up the column. And I did it for the first week or so. And then one day, George got me on the private jet that we all traveled on, which was wonderful because you got to know them well on the plane trip. And he said, your material that you're writing under my name is a bunch of old heavy swear word, which I won't use, but you get the press, you get the message. Wasn't happy. And I said, well, George, I'd love to do better, but you've got to talk to me. You've got to tell me what's in your blood, how you liked San Francisco, what did you do? And he realized that, yes. So from then on, we hit it off more. But although I was his ghostwriter, we weren't the closest. And the closest I was more close to John, because John was, as you know, Jude, John was so wicked and all the rest of it. And Paul was a very nice guy then, as he is today, except today he's worth a few more shillings than anyone I know in the rock world. And so, and then George, as I said, and Ringo, again, like George, was kind of, well, not second class, but they were in the back row, if you know. And George even admitted much later that he felt he was a second class Beatle citizen until he broke away and showed the world what great music he could write. And he was a Hollywood producer, made movies in England, and they all blossomed, as you know, Jude. You're following me every step of the way. They followed. They kind of grew up, and they were growing up still when I was with them.
They tell the story about when you met John Lennon and introduced yourself.
Yeah, well, John Lennon immediately loved to needle people. You know this, Jude. You have covered this. You've immersed yourself. You are the Lennon expert in the world. And John liked to, if he met somebody, he would needle them. And I'll tell you a story. I have a very good friend called Chris Hillman. Chris Hillman was a young singing star of the emerging Birds. And the other day, Chris said to me, because we're sort of neighbors and I got to know him, he said, I met John Lennon in England when I was very young, maybe 17, 18. He said, the whole night I was so in awe of sitting opposite John at this nightclub that I never said a word. And finally, John turned to me and turned to the crowd sitting at our table and said, does he speak? And Chris tells that story. And Chris says, yes, I was so, I was so overawed in his presence that I never said a word. So that was John. He liked to needle, and you know this. We've talked about this before, Jude. John was just outrageous.
Yeah, when I interviewed Dave Binion at Quarry Bank Grammar, John's high school, yes, he was the head boy, and now he's a professor at Quarry Bank, or he was in 1993 when I interviewed him. And he said, yes, John Lennon was a salt. And I don't mean
salt.
A salt, S-A-L-T. And I don't mean salt of the earth. I mean salt in an open wound. But I thought what he said to you was funny because he says, you introduced yourself and you said you were Ivor Davis, and he said,
you're Ivan the Terrible. And I said, no, Ivor. But he just ignored that because for the next few weeks he called me Ivan the Terrible because was his way of getting, kicks on Route 66 or whatever.
And Ivan the Not So Terrible.
Yes. So, and then I realized that I wasn't going to get it out of him, so because this is the way he operated. And I don't. You in your books about John have it all spelled out in great detail, more than anyone I know.
Well, I love that story. It's Ivor. All right.
Yeah.
Ivan the not so terrible. He
Yeah.
wasn't going to give up on that. That's so funny. Now I know that you've added you've added a lot, because there are 100 extra pages in this book. Here's the original one, and here is the new one with that great photo of you on the cover. The 60th anniversary. Can't believe it was 60 years ago. That is just crazy talk. Okay, so but you've added a lot of new photos from some of the world's most famous photographers. Tell us about some of the people who have contributed to the book.
Well, the great Harry Benson. Harry Benson is such a character. He's such a marvelous photographer. He got Ronald Reagan to do strange things with Nancy, one of his strange things. But he got the pillow fight. Remember the pillow fight? That was Harry persuading the Beatles to do something different. And that is one of his most iconic pictures. Yeah, the pillow fight. So there it is. Harry is brilliant. And his picture, he has a lot of photo books out. But he not only did the Beatles, he also did a slew of famous people. He worked with me on the Daily Express. Then he went on to work for Time magazine and Life magazine. And he's still in his 90s. I spoke to him a few days ago, and he's having a big party because he was on the plane when the Beatles arrived in New York City at the airport. And I don't think at the time it was called John Kennedy, because John Kennedy had been killed 6 months earlier in November 63, and this was February 64. And the airport was called, and I don't know if you remember what it was called then, but it wasn't Kennedy. So Harry was there, and he very kindly provided me with pictures, great pictures, wonderful pictures of Paul and Linda, and just terrific stuff. And there's a lot of other people who unfortunately are no longer with us who did it. But one guy who really is terrific as well is Henry Dilks. And Henry is very friendly with Paul McCartney, and Henry gave me some terrific pictures. So I was very fortunate to get some of the best photographers in the world helping me out with the book, which is nice.
I noticed Ron Joy is in there as well.
Ron Joy, and unfortunately, Ron Joy, who was on the trip with me, is no longer with us. Kirk Gunther was fantastic, and I just there's Ron Joy's pictures, and there they are fishing in the Waterside Inn in Seattle on about the third day. Of course, it was purely a set-up picture because there was no fish that close. If they did catch anything, they never shared the fish with me.
And I'll say something so that the screen will go to your pictures and people can see them. Is that showing up, Lena?
Yeah.
Yeah, that shows up very well. And it shows a callow young man with a cigar in his fingers, who I think was me, if I can think back, and George, when we were hanging out in his room one day, I'm trying to squeeze information out of him.
There are so many great photos. This one
It's a terrific one of you. Can you see the one with
yeah,
Paul?
This is a great one too.
Oh, that's a great picture. I mean, there's Arthur Schreiber, young Arthur Schreiber there. There's the young Ivor Davis there. There's the young John, Paul, George, and Ringo. There's Derek Taylor, no longer with us. Neil Aspinall, no longer with us. Mal Evans, no longer with us. And that's the sad thing. They ain't around anymore, except, as you know, as the world knows, Sir Richard Starkey and Sir Paul McCartney, the two leftovers. So
say something so it'll go to the photo and they can see.
Yeah, I mean, there it is. And there's the Righteous Brothers there who were the opening act. Jackie DeShannon, a brilliant songwriter. Jackie was on the tour, but nobody, and you can understand this, nobody came to see Jackie DeShannon or the Righteous Brothers. They only came to see the Beatles. And I felt bad for them. And actually the Righteous Brothers ended up asking Brian, can we go home? Because every 5 minutes or every so often, the Beatles land in a helicopter in the middle of our act. But nobody went to see them. But that's the nature of the beast. But I do in my book have a story that was told to me that Little Richard, the Beatles opened for Little Richard in England. I'm sure you know that, Jude.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Little Richard spoke to a friend of mine, and he told me that Little Richard said, "Oh, not a bad group. That Paul is okay, but the others, they're probably not going to go far." So it shows you, doesn't it? It shows
That man is insane and doesn't know one thing he's talking about.
Yeah, but the Beatles, as you know, both of you know, Beatles love Little Richard. They love all that stuff. So
except for the fact that he did not sing the songs as they were on the record when he was in concert, as most people in concert do. He was ad-libbing and adding on, and John Lennon got really mad about it and said, "I found out I'm not a fan of people performing live. I'm a fan of records." He wanted to hear it exactly, the way.
Talking about, as I'm sure you both know, I think the Beatles are the most recorded group by other cover bands, other cover artists. Leonard Nimoy did a silly song, I think, "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds." And my favorite is actually "A Hard Day's Night" as sung or recited. And if you haven't seen it, you must see it. It is a hilarious spoof. Peter Sellers, who was a great friend of the Beatles, did a Laurence Olivier Shakespearean rendition of "A Hard Day's Night." Have you seen it?
Yes.
Oh,
you've seen it, Lena?
No, I have not.
Lena, you've got to go home, and when you're home, you've got to put that on, and you will roar. I love it. Favorite. So when people say, "What's your favorite cover band?" I say Peter Sellers is my cover band. He doesn't sing, he recites. It is hilarious.
I love it.
Well, I have to say, there's an important story, very important story in the book. It was in the first book as well, and people overlook this, but when someone tells a story in the Beatles world, it gets repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated. And pretty soon, even if it's not exactly right, it is indelibly ingrained in people's heads, and you cannot get them to stop believing their story. For example, the Beatles taking marijuana with Bob Dylan on the 1964 tour that Ivor was on. Okay, it happened. It happened. It happened in New York. Those things are true. But as Ivor points out in this book, it did not happen in mid-tour when the tour could have been canceled if they were caught. Brian Epstein was very scrupulous. He would not have allowed them to do that in mid-tour. Mm-hmm. And it did not happen at the Delmonico, where there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of security guards and police. Mm-hmm. It did happen in New York, but it happened. You'll have to read Ivor's book to find out when it really did happen and where it really did happen. And there were witnesses, not just Ivor, Larry Kane, Art Schreiber, all of them saw Bob Dylan come in with a rucksack, but I won't tell you when it was. You got to read Ivor's book if you want to know the true story. Right, Ivor?
Oh, right. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for not giving that away, because by doing that wonderful lead up, I'm sure I'm going to sell another 10 books at least.
At least.
Thank you. Yes. I mean, it is true. And it is true that a story, and it happens in so many instances, in politics, in entertainment, that a story is told and it gains so much leeway that people believe it. And what happens, I mean, I think it's worse today, and you two can tell me, what do you think? Because I've done too much talking and I want to hear from you. Tell me, when something goes out on the internet, many people believe it. Yes. And so much rumors and innuendo and lies and whatever. Anyway, so don't you think we never had the internet? We never had cell phones. I always say my only regret was I never took my cell phone on that trip. I would have taken so many pictures, so many selfies. So it was a different world. I mean, when the Beatles came to do Ed Sullivan in February 1964, few people knew about them. And I'm sure you know that there are some lovely ladies who are writing a book. There's a lady called Debbie Gendler. I don't know if I mentioned her to you, who was asked by Brian Epstein's lawyer if she would line up a bunch of screamers for the Ed Sullivan Show. Well, as it happens, believe it or not, she was not able to do that, but she was at the show and there were people screaming and so on. So it's, and the other thing about the screaming is, which I get a sort of amusing thing, and we've met these ladies at the Beatle Fest. Why were you crazy about George? Well, George was crazy about me, says she. She says. Why? Because every time he looked up, he was right looking into my eyes, and so you can't explain it. They believed it. These young women believed it. Now, I don't think too many young men believed it because, but it was very heterosexual. So yes, but it is fun to hear a lady, a top executive, telling me Paul was in love with me when I saw him in Cleveland because he waved at me and he. Anyway, so I enjoy that, and you wonder why they were screaming. Anyway, screaming it was the loudest thing that went on, and as you know, both know, listening to we couldn't hear anything in the front row.
Right.
So there it is.
Absolutely. You know, it's for a lot of those girls, that was a highlight for them for the rest of their lives. I've heard some of them speak about when they, met Ringo or touched one of them, and the rest of their life has just been nothing since the highlight of that moment.
Yes. And yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, and so has Jude. I mean, when we're at the Beatle Fest, we meet a lot of people that come through and buy your book and want to tell you, don't they, why they were having this affair that only they knew about with one of the Beatles. It's and I suppose I don't want to get into medical stuff, but I guess hormonally that was not surprising because anyway. So I think I don't want to get too tricky.
That was their gift. Their gift was, and I've heard this repeated not hundreds of times, but literally thousands of times. He looked straight at me. They had the gift of connecting with that audience. They had the gift of looking straight into the eyes of people. And, in the movie Imagine, this young man shows up on John's doorstep and says to him, "How did you know everything that was going on in my life? How did you know what was happening to me? Because you wrote all those songs just for me." And John said, "Man, I didn't write those songs for you. I wrote them for me." He's like, no, they were about me. That was their gift. That was their genius, that they appealed one to one to one to one with all of those people.
And do you think, taking that a step further, both of you, do you think this was the same case with other rock groups? I mean, with the Stones, with the Dave Clark Five, with rock groups of that period? Maybe a bit more with the Monkees, who were a ripoff anyway of a nice ripoff of the Beatles. But did other rock groups have such adoring fans?
Lanea, you're the expert on that.
Well, I do think they were adoring, and that there was a lot of groupies and maybe a little less professionalism. I think the Beatles were kind of, forced to be professional, and Brian kept them in tow and kept them away from the young girls and getting into trouble. I think the other bands didn't have anybody, kind of keeping them in line. So I do think that there was lots of girls that did have that connection with other with other bands and teen idols. The Beatles are just a larger product. So there's just a lot more people to pull into the story.
Yes,
So that's,
yeah. So I mean, I don't want to turn it on you, but why do you think, particularly Jude, who's so immersed in Beatle folklore and history, why do you think that today, 60 years after the Beatles came to America, they are almost bigger than ever?
You know, Ivor, I wish I knew. And John used to say if he knew, he'd form a band and he'd be a manager. You know, you go to Concord, Massachusetts, that quiet little town outside of Boston, and there in a 2-block radius lived Nathaniel Hawthorne, Bronson Alcott, Thoreau, Emerson,
Yes.
Dorothy Parker, Louisa May Alcott.
Yeah.
It was something happened in that town, something magical that we can't explain. And that's what happened in Liverpool in the late 1950s. Within a 15-mile radius of each other lived everyone that they all grew up together. Even though they didn't know Brian, all of them grew up together, not knowing each other. And it was a once in a lifetime. And I love all the other groups. I love the Kinks. I love the Dave Clark Five. I love all the other groups. But there was something special about those four. I mean, there have been books written about it that they are earth, water, fire, air.
Yeah.
They represent the elements. There was a connection. I don't think we'll ever be able to explain it, but it's timeless. And now that I'm in the studio with them making Rubber Soul, and I see the pains that they went to, working 12 and 14 hours a day and getting up and doing it again, they had a drive that I've never seen in any other group to create. And not just to, okay, that's the song. No, we're doing it over. We're starting over from scratch because I'm not happy with it. We're dropping everything we did yesterday and we're starting over again. It was just that flash of genius. I don't know that we'll ever explain it.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
No, and I don't think it will ever be replicated again.
No, no.
I don't see it, especially today.
With the work ethic, they had a work ethic that was unequaled. They, in the chapter I just wrote, they worked on Nowhere Man, and it's midnight. They've been in studio for 12 hours, and John hates what they've done so far. And he says, I'm going to go home and go to my home studio, and I'm going to work on it. And George Martin says, but you got to be back here by 10:30 a.m. John goes, but it's midnight and I've got an hour commute home that gets me home at 1. Then I've got an hour commute tomorrow morning I've got to do to come back. So I have to leave my house by 9 and I got to work in studio when I get home. When am I going to sleep? That wasn't a concern. Nobody cared when they were going to sleep. And now everybody is wah, wah, wah about, I'm not going to get, you know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah. So that's true. The work ethic was also, as you know, Brian cracked the whip. Brian, I remember on the 64 tour, I would go into their suite and they'd be on the floor writing. I would walk back on the plane and John and Paul would be writing something. And then I discovered the reason that they had to write new songs immediately to order was that Brian had then sold the new Christmas album, which had to come out in December, first week of December, and this was September. And so they had to churn it out. And the amazing thing is, as you know, they did churn and turn it out, but they churned and turned out an impeccable collection of songs and music.
Right.
So, and that's the big difference. That's
most people pressed for a deadline couldn't do.
Yeah.
You know, it's easier to just, and they quit doing cover songs. And I love the cover songs.
Yeah.
They're some of my favorites, but they quit doing covers.
Yeah.
Everything was all original. It's so difficult to do. So difficult.
Yeah. So. The other thing I was going to ask you, and it's an interesting fact that about 20 years ago, I went to Liverpool 25 years ago. And to be honest with you, when I went, the imprint of the Beatles was barely perception. It wasn't, I mean, this is hard to believe, but if you go now, it's Beatles 24 hours a day, all time, the statues and the restaurants and the whole thing. And in a way, the Beatles in the early days were not heroes in their own neighborhood. And a good friend of mine who used to deliver fruit and vegetables to George Harrison's house told me a story, and I'll try and clean it up a bit. He said he delivered fruit and vegetables to George Harrison's house, and the next door neighbors got into a conversation with him and said, well, those guys perform in the house. He said, they call it fucking music, but it's just fucking noise. So there you go. Their music is just noise to local neighbors. So yeah. I like that story because it tells you they were not heroes in their own neighborhood until much later.
Right. Yeah, they were just sort of just teenage kids that weren't working a job. They were playing music.
That's right.
And everybody else was working a job to survive.
That's it.
So,
and there was, because don't forget, in England after World War II, there was a work ethic. You had to get out. You had to bring the country back to the way it was. You can't, I mean, there were ration books. There were, the Beatles were all fairly deprived. They had to eat that awful egg powder, which is a powdered egg that you fry, that I always found was vomitable. Anyway, so it's a whole different atmosphere. World War II is at an end. The country is struggling to get back on its feet. And these Beatles suddenly show up with their music, and they're not heroes until much later.
Yeah, well, it is. Thank you for doing this and redoing this book with so much extra information. I have a feeling there's a story in here that may involve John Lennon and may involve a beautiful woman and may involve some things that I don't want Cynthia to know about. Is there?
Yes, I mean, there are a lot of other little morsels, delightful morsels. That, you know, do you want to give everything away? I don't know. I don't. Wonderful stories that are there. Just everything touching on, you know, I mean, you're getting, I don't know how far along, but was Yoko the Dragon Lady? Was she good for John? You know, I mean, I throw that at you because the nation is divided. Now, Yoko is now in her 90s. I think she's moved out of Dakota. She's moved to upstate New York, where John wasn't a bad real estate guy. I mean, they also had a lot of apartments in the Dakota. I'm telling you what you know already. So it's funny that when John used to cheat at Monopoly with us, he was actually, in his brain, he was accumulating property.
Great lesson.
I love
Great
it.
lesson. Okay, Ivor, I'm dying to order a copy. Where do people need to go to buy the newest?
The new Beatles and Me on Tour 60th anniversary edition can be obtained on Amazon, which is the best place to get books. Although, as we all know, as a writer, you get a pittance by royalty, but you know, you're over a barrel. But we won't go into the book business, which is a hard day's night or week. And you can get it on Amazon, probably the best place because you'll get it quickly. And I hope you enjoy it. And thank you for asking.
Okay. So can you buy them from your website?
Yeah, I'm not set up to do that. And unfortunately, I have to do that. And there is an ebook, obviously. A lot of people like ebooks. And as we were talking, ebooks are pretty good when you're going on a long walk and you want to listen to Jude's book with that brilliant audio. And you have how many hours to spare?
33.
33. Okay, well.
Yeah.
And you want to listen to the Beatles. So it's a whole different ball game, the publishing business. And I mean, we love what we do we not, ladies?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Oh,
It's fantastic to be able to share these stories, and especially the stories that you have to share with us, Ivor.
But what
I
is
hope
great,
that
what is great is, sorry to interrupt you, but what is great is reading some of Jude's incredibly, I always say to you, you are so amazingly detailed in what you do. So when you say something, you back it up. It's not fiction, it's fact, but entertainingly dressed up. And I can tell you that if I want to get anything about John Lennon, I've got to go to your book. So keep up the good work. As I said, if I'm hungry for Beatle food, I'll come to you.
that sounds terrific. Well, maybe we'll get to see you at the Fest for Beatles fans in August
Yes,
in
Chicago.
Chicago. So maybe we can be a threesome.
Absolutely, I'd love to. And you can take me out to a fine dinner because now you're the expert, you're the cuisine lady,
Sure.
and I mean cuisine has done quite well, and I love. Although the Beatles, as you know, with all your, I mean, the Beatles, I mean, Ringo was happy with beans on toast.
Yes. Well,
That's not a 5 Michelin
well,
restaurant with beans on toast.
it beats egg powder,
Ah,
you
yeah,
know.
if you ever heard, I mean, had you ever heard of egg powder before? But
No,
forget
but
about
when Jude and I did some recipe cards a while back, and we did very authentic Liverpudlian recipes, and I tested some of them out. They're terrible.
Yeah.
We had to Americanize them a little bit with some sugar
Ah,
and butter.
I actually have heard of egg powder, and that leads me to a promo for the Fest for Beatles Fans blog that Ivor and I just wrote together, just was posted about a week ago. We've been moving, the Fest for Beatles Fans has been moving through Revolver, song by song by song by song. And I write when it was recorded, how it was recorded, blah, 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 blah. Every month we have a guest whom I interview about the song. And the song for January was Good Day Sunshine. And the person that I interviewed, our celebrity the month, is none other than Ivor Davis. And we talked about the fact that Good Day Sunshine is very much like the music hall songs that the Beatles used to listen to growing up, and that Jim Mack was very familiar with in his band. And Ivor talked about the powdered eggs and the aftermath of the war in that blog, didn't you, Ivor?
I did. In fact, again, the interesting thing is what we forget with many of the current people is that Beatles grew up not in poverty, but in deprived circumstances, because we were all deprived after World War II. And as I say, the Beatles are about my age, a little bit younger, but we didn't have everything. So the food was not terrific. And we lived on hard days. And so Good Day Sunshine, as you pointed out, was an uplifting thing to Happy Days Will Be Here Again and all that kind of stuff with the Beatles. And it's always wonderful, as you all know, about the background to some of the songs. I mean, Paul's songs when his mother died, and John's songs, and that's why there are some experts out there. I'm not sure, is it Ken Womack? Who are the experts that you've had on the show you know about, who go into the songs and divvy them up and analyze them to the cows come home. And you can do that with the song. As you know, many songs have their roots in something or other.
Yeah, they do. Well, thank you for doing that blog with me. And you can find it, guys, if you want to read more about Good Day Sunshine on the Fest for Beatles Fans. It's thefest.com. And you can read the blog that Ivor wrote. It's a very, very interesting interview. And I'm just sad that our time is up. And we enjoyed it so much, Ivor. Thank you
Thanks.
for being on the show.
And thank you for having me, and thank you both. And thank you, Rand. Always the invisible man. Is the invisible man there?
The Invisible Man is upstairs working on the PowerPoint for the fest.
Okay.
Just
Terrific.
days
All right.
away.
Well, thank you for having me. Good luck. And I look forward to seeing you in Chicago.
Terrific. Can't
Night,
wait.
night.
We
Okay.
cannot wait. And we want to extend an invitation to everyone tonight to the Fest for Beatles fans, which is just days away. It's 17 days away. And it is going to be at the TWA Hotel at JFK in New York, celebrating, as Ivor is celebrating, the 60th anniversary of the tour that happened in 1964, in August and September of 1964. The Fest for Beatles fans is celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Beatles coming to America in February of that year. And it was kind of like, you know, when aliens come and they test land and they stay for just a few days and they say, oh, yeah, it's safe to go there. And then they come back and stay a long time. This was the test landing. They came and stayed for a few weeks and said, oh, yeah, okay, America's fine. It's cool to go there. And then they came back in August when Ivor joined them for the North American tour. But the fest will be, we have a great lineup at the fest this year. Good old Frida, the one that Ivor was talking about, Frida Kelly, the secretary of the Beatles fan club for 12 years, worked with Mr. Brian and Nims. Wonderful, amazing lady is going to be there. Ruth and Angie McCartney were supposed to be there, but they have sidelined Angie from going, but we're going to have her in our hearts. Billy J. Kramer, who is looking great, he is going to be there. Lawrence Juber. Who am I missing? I don't know. Who am I leaving out?
Jay Bergen.
Oh, Jay Bergen, who wrote this great book, Lennon, the Mobster and the Lawyer. This is how I found out about Scott McKinley, because he reads the audio book. And I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is John Lennon. Jay is one of the nicest people you will ever meet. He was John's attorney. And if you don't have this book, you need to, because it's got new material that you've never read before. Who else, Lena, is going?
Let me see. I think that's Ken Womack will be there with his new book about Mal Evans.
Yeah, Living the Beatles Legend. Very heart-wrenching. I am reading that. I have to read that book in small doses because it's about Mal Evans, who's a Beatles roadie and friend. And in fact, Mal is the one that called Ivor on the phone and said, get your keys and get over here. We're getting ready to go meet Elvis. Get over here. And so I know you were good friends with Mal, Ivor, as well.
I mean, Mal was a sweetie pie. He was the gatekeeper. He was the beloved, loyal servant. I use that term loosely, of the Beatles. And, you know, he loved what he did. And what struck me as unusual, I mean, I've read Ken's book, which is actually terrific, a lot of great new stuff. But what surprised me, and I don't know if it surprised you knowing the figures, was that Mal kept a diary, and wasn't the kind of guy that you think would keep a diary, but he did it. And a lot of the stuff in Ken's book delves into what he wrote in his diary. So that's pretty accurate, I would think.
Yes. Oh, absolutely accurate. And Alf Bicknell, I've got his right here. Thank goodness. Ken also wrote this great book on George Martin, Maximum Volume. It's a 2-volume series, but Alf Bicknell, John's personal chauffeur and friend, also kept a diary. Thank goodness for these people that kept these diaries. Or if you didn't keep a diary and you have a memory that is incredible to the max. Chris Carter said it best. He said, Ivor remembers everything in vivid detail. Yes, Chris Carter, you are so right. So you don't even need a diary because your mind is like a steel trap. And that's the truth.
That's tremendous.
Well, my steel trap gets a little bit rusty at times.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I've never seen it. Well, so thank you, everyone. Hope to see you February 9th through 11th at the Fest for Beatles fans. And if you come by my booth, I'll give you a cute little shine on flashlight.
Oh, nice, nice. So that sounds like a wonderful weekend, Jude. Good luck. Have a great time. So she said it certainly kicked off 2024 with a bang. 2 shows in 1 month. It's amazing. If you missed our fun and energy-packed show with Fred LeBlanc of Cowboy Mouth, a great band. I don't know if I have a cowboy mouth, but you might want to tune in to hear Fred LeBlanc talk about his John Lennon inspired music and all of the hits that this Louisiana band has had. He has very inspirational stories. So tune in to that podcast as well. We have much more planned in the months ahead, so just hang on to your hats. Until then, here's to food for thought, food for the soul, food for the love of rock and roll.
Ta-ra and shine on.